Hi, folks. Today I'd like to talk about something interesting that I have observed, and that is related to Mr. Steve Jobs, the late legendary Steve Jobs. And what I have to say is regarding technology entrepreneurship. All right. So, Steve Jobs, as we know, is legendary, and he's the ideologue for a generation of entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs in specific. Why is that? Well, we know he created Apple. He created, I think he created Pixar Studios, and then he created some uh, high-end server company. I think it was called Next or something. And then, of course, the iPhone and iPod, and the rest, as they say, is history. All right. So I have been a technology entrepreneur myself, and I am frequently in the company of existing technology entrepreneurs and the aspirants, people who aspire to be great technology entrepreneurs, who as of right now are not so, but they want to be, they aspire to be. And who else, the role model, but the great Steve Jobs? That is all great. We need role models, we need examples, we need people for inspiration, for motivation, and we also need people who are successful in order to have the belief that such great things are, after all, humanly possible. They're not just pipe dreams. All right? Great. All of that is great. However, I frequently encounter people who are full of anxiety, when you really probe them. And it turns out that their ideal is Mr. Steve Jobs. Well, and all of the rough edges of his personality, his charisma, his strong headedness of having his way, which eventually proves more often than not to be the right way, and his peculiar ways, right? Who would not like to be in such a great company, right? Because you are asserting your individuality. And you're asserting your individuality by having a role model who is successful. Well, that needs to be carefully analyzed, and we need to ensure that we take the right lessons. So, contrary to popular belief, Steve Jobs, the late Mr. Steve Jobs, was no idiot, right? He he knew his limitations as well, um, his many limitations, and he clearly knew his capabilities and his dreams as well. And clearly, he trusted his instincts. So, this message is for those. I'd like to highlight the pragmatic ways of Steve Jobs too, so that the entrepreneurial aspirants also keep that in mind, that despite all his greatness, he was still a human being, and a pragmatic human being, not just someone who's always high on LSD or um, drugs and building the next big thing. No, not really. Even though that is a part of him, but that's not his entirety. And to give an example of this, there are ample examples, right? For example, in the days of Apple, even though Apple and Microsoft were competitors in many areas, but neither Microsoft nor Apple had any problem whatsoever with Microsoft publishing their famous Office suite for the Macs, right? No problem whatsoever, because it made money for both Microsoft and for Apple, right? Pragmatism. In addition to that, Mr. Bill Gates, who again was a fierce competitor, but he saw a win-win and he had it. Now, back to Mr. Steve Jobs. One other example of his pragmatism is, uh, let's say, just think about it for a moment. When he was making iPhone, or even before that, iPod, he could easily have chosen, at least maybe not during the iPod time, but certainly for iPhone, he could easily have chosen to have the entire supply chain of iPhone vertically integrated. That is, to have every component that is present in an iPhone built by Apple. He did not do that. Not at all. Because if he chose to do that, the time and effort that would be required would be enormous. And by the time he would be able to eventually do that at all, if at all, it would be too late. The market would be gone. And Steve Jobs is no idiot. He knew he was after a market. He was pragmatic, right? So we should never lose sight of that. And lastly, the most important thing I'd like people to think of is related to a famous commencement speech that Mr. Steve Jobs gave in Stanford, I believe. It has three stories. It's very famous and very inspiring. Great speech, very inspiring. But the key takeaway lesson from it is, for me at least, that every single day he used to ask himself, what would I be doing if I know this is the last day of my life? What would I be doing? And then, whatever that happens to be, then you do that. That is the crisp focus that is needed, and that is the most valuable thing. So, let's say in an alternate universe, if Steve Jobs had lived by this um, agenda, so to say, and yet he did not achieve, in an alternate universe, he did not achieve any commercial success. There were no Apple, there were no Pixar, there were no iPhones, nothing. Let's say, I can assure you that Steve Jobs would have had no regrets whatsoever, right? None. Because he did what he could and he wanted to do every single day, intentionally, thoughtfully, creatively. Whether or not it leads to commercial success or not is really secondary. And that is what I want many people to keep in mind. Thank you very much.